Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, another episode of Karls Spirits tonight. This is episode 53, and I thought we would stay in the vein of Heaven Hill, since that's what we did on our last episode, where we looked at Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. Tonight, we're going to look at another Heaven Hill offering, this time a wheated bourbon, and it's kind of a standard in the bourbon world, and that is Larceny wheated bourbon. As I mentioned, this is a Heaven Hill product, and they also own another wheated bourbon line, Old Fitzgerald. And Larceny is really an offshoot of this more premium line of wheated bourbon, Old Fitzgerald. In fact, looking at the bottle right here on the very front, I see Old Fitzgerald 3 times. So they're really trying to tie into that more premium line with this particular drink. Some have speculated this is simply Old Fitzgerald that is very immature or didn't live up to the tasting that Old Fitzgerald should have in its profile. I'm going to let you be the judge on that. The story behind Larceny is actually kind of cool. According to Bourbon Heritage Legend, which we've learned to take with a grain of salt, I hope by now, John E. Fitzgerald opened a distillery in Frankfort, Kentucky, very soon after the end of the Civil War. And rather than trying to sell his spirits to the general public, he sold exclusively to steamship lines, railroad lines, and private clubs. This, of course, drove up the demand for his bourbon, making this very sought after and a bourbon for the wealthy, you might say. Well, as I said, we should learn to take these legends for what they are. In reality, John Fitzgerald was not a distiller at all. He never owned a distillery, in fact. Instead, he was a U.S. Treasury agent. His job was to go to various distilleries in Frankfurt and make sure they were correctly reporting their taxes on the barrels of bourbon they had in their warehouses. As such, he toured a lot of these distilleries, and he really had a taste for what he thought was the good stuff. He also had keys to these warehouses. So he would go in after hours and basically steal bourbon from where he learned the best barrels in each warehouse were. So he was committing larceny. He was stealing. These particular barrels that he was stealing from became known as Fitzgerald barrels. And for Heaven Hill and Larceny, which is their budget line based off the old Fitzgerald brand, they're trying to give a little nod to the past, but yet have something a little bit more current for the young kids today. So Larceny gets its name from a guy who stole bourbon, essentially, who was a treasury agent, interestingly enough. Let's go ahead and get into the pour tonight. First of all, it is 68% corn. It's 20% wheat. So no rye in this. We went with the wheated mash bill. 12% malted barley, I think, is what's left over. Heaven Hill swears this is aged anywhere between 6 and 12 years. Now, you could have a blend of those ages in the bottle, but you have to go with the youngest bourbon in the bottle. So it's reported as a 6-year, usually. And it is bottled at what I consider a very easy drinking 92 proof. In the glass, it is a light amber color. It's got fat legs, but they really run down the glass fairly quickly. So they're not very sticky, these legs. So let's get into the nose. The first thing I really pick up on this is a musty note. I really think of dried grass, and not in a good way. It's not off-putting. It's just a real musty, dry, grassy nose for me. There is a hint, very lightly, of floral notes and possibly a little citrus. And something a little sweet in here, which I'm going to say is brown sugar that's been caramelized a little bit. So, taste. The very first thing I noticed, it has a thin mouthfeel for a 92 proof. It feels very, very watered down to me. There are hints of cinnamon and mint right off the front, right at the very front of my tongue. There's an undertone of classic bourbon notes of caramel and oak, but they are very, very fleeting. I mean, they go quick. In fact, it may be even more correct to say that it's not an oak flavor, but more of a tannin that I'm really getting. An oaky tannin. It seems very acidic to me in some ways. At 92 proof, it is very easy to drink, though. As a finish, there's a little bit of burn on the very back of the taste buds. It's very pleasant. There are some very, very faint notes of more oak or tannins, perhaps, and a little bit more floral at the end as well. But they're all very, very faint. I like most wheated bourbons, but this one just really doesn't fall in my wheelhouse for flavor. To me, everything seems like it's a shadow of the flavor it should be in a bourbon. Having said that, the price on this is awesome. It's below a $30, which is great. It's readily available almost everywhere you look, and it's very approachable for new bourbon drinkers. So I can just see the appeal that this has for many bourbon drinkers. I can see why Heaven Hill sells a lot of Larceny. Uh, but for me personally, I don't necessarily hate it. It just doesn't do much for me. I'm not a fan of the floral notes. I'm not a fan of mint in my bourbon. So for me, I'm going to give that 2.5. That's 2.5 Karl stars for Larceny. It's really going to get that high of a rating for me because its approachability and its availability and its price. Um, the bourbon notes I like just are not in this bottle. And I just can't go any higher than 2.5 stars tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's my take on Larceny, wheated bourbon. And I want everyone to stay safe, peace, and happy pours.